Forget dates. Forget battles. Forget crowns. Imagine this instead. It is before dawn. The fire has burned itself down to red embers. The stone walls are sweating cold. The air inside the room bites like metal. Every breath scrapes the lungs. Somewhere in the darkness, a man with the power to end lives with a single sentence is shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering, fingers numb, heart struggling to keep rhythm. This is not a prisoner. This is not a peasant. This is the King of England. In the 16th century, the Tudor dynasty stood at the absolute summit of Western wealth. No family on the island of Britain had ever commanded more gold, more land, more human labor. Henry VIII alone owned more than 50 palaces, each stuffed with imported tapestries worth the price of warships, walls hung with gold-threaded silks, floors buried beneath layers of rushes and furs. In modern money, Henry VIII spent millions on luxury. And yet here is the impossible statistic that shatters everything we think we know about power. Despite owning half the buildings in England and commanding thousands of servants, the Tudor monarch spent roughly 30% of his life in a state of clinical hypothermia. Not discomfort. Not a bit cold. Clinical hypothermia, the point where the human body begins to fail. Heart rate slows. Blood thickens. Muscles lose coordination. The brain misfires. This was not occasional. It was routine. During the worst years of the Little Ice Age, modern climatological reconstruction shows that the temperature inside royal stone chambers could fall to -5 degrees Celsius. That is 23 degrees Fahrenheit. Colder than many modern freezers. Inside the bedroom of the most powerful man in England. Pause on that. A man who could order executions with a whisper. A man who could bankrupt nobles on a whim. A man who could dissolve monasteries and rewrite the religious structure of an entire nation. Utterly powerless against the air inside his own bedroom. This is the psychological trap. We are taught, trained, to believe that money buys comfort. That wealth bends the world to human will. That progress is a straight line upward from suffering to safety. The Tudor era proves the opposite. In this world, wealth did not insulate you from suffering. It concentrated it. The grander the palace, the colder it became. The thicker the walls, the faster heat vanished. The higher your status, the longer you were expected to sit motionless while your body bled warmth into stone. Money bought you tapestries. It bought you gold. It bought you status. What it did not buy you was warmth. And the price of that failure was paid in flesh. This is not a story about drafty windows. This is a story about survival. Just as Christian civilization once balanced on a blade's edge at Montcassard, 52 men against 1, the Tudor dynasty lived under a quieter but equally lethal threat, biological collapse. The cold was not seasonal inconvenience. It was an enemy. The Little Ice Age was not a long winter. It was a 300-year siege. A slow, grinding assault on the human body, year after year, generation after generation. Crops failed. Rivers froze. Roads vanished under ice. And at the center of it all sat London, the heart of English power, slowly choking. The Thames did not simply freeze. It turned into a highway of ice. Trade stopped. Food rotted in ports. Coal deliveries failed. Entire neighborhoods ran out of fuel. The capital of a growing empire became a cold trap, its political machinery grinding to a halt under snow and frost. And inside the palaces, the danger was even greater. Because if a king died suddenly, if his heart gave out from cold stress, if a winter fever tipped into pneumonia, England did not simply mourn. It destabilized. No clear air meant civil war. A weak air meant rebellion. A sick air meant foreign invasion. The Tudor line was not secured by armies alone. It was secured night by night, by whether a human body could survive the cold until morning. The nursery was no safer than the battlefield. Royal infants, wrapped in silks, surrounded by servants, died at horrifying rates. Cold lungs. Cold blood. Infections that modern heating would have prevented vanished entire bloodlines. The death chill did not discriminate. It haunted cradles and council chambers alike. This was not weather. This was a predator. It stalked banquets. It prowled bedchambers. It waited patiently in the walls. And unlike armies, it could not be bribed, executed, or negotiated with. The Tudors were not fighting winter with swords. They were fighting it with their own metabolism. Every night was a gamble. Every winter a war. Now listen carefully, because this is where history stops being decorative and becomes dangerous. There are 3 secrets buried inside Tudor records. 3 truths so counterintuitive they destroy the fantasy of castles as safe, luxurious refuges. And once you understand them, you will never look at old buildings, or modern comfort, the same way again. First, the secret of the cold battery. Tudor palaces were built with 6-foot-thick stone walls. Massive, imposing, unbreakable, and fatally flawed. Stone is not insulation. Stone is a thermal sponge. These walls absorbed cold for months, storing it like a battery stores electricity. Even when fires burned, the walls drank the heat faster than flames could replace it. The room might feel warm for minutes, then the cold would creep back in, leaching warmth directly from human skin. The heart had to work harder. Blood vessels constricted. The body entered a constant state of stress. These buildings were not shelters. They were refrigerators. Second, the lethal fashion paradox. The iconic Tudor look, ruffed collars, layered silks, heavy furs, was not protection. Was a mistake. High ruffs trapped moisture from breath, accelerating heat loss around the neck, one of the body's most critical thermal zones. Long gowns restricted movement, preventing circulation. Heavy fabrics became damp, turning into cold compresses wrapped around vital organs. Ironically, the poor, crammed into small wooden homes with low ceilings and shared body heat, often stayed warmer than nobles freezing alone in vast halls. Status became suffering. Third, the wine Slushie records. This is not metaphor. Foreign diplomats wrote it down. In the Simancas archives and Venetian state papers, envoys described state banquets where wine froze inside the cup, even as servants fed logs into roaring fireplaces just feet away. Imagine the scene. Gold plates, roaring fire, silk-draped walls, and wine turning to ice as the king lifts it to his lips. This was not comfort. This was absurdity bordering on madness. And it raises a terrifying question. Here is the question that should not exist, but does. How did the most expensive, advanced buildings of their age become the most efficient killing machines for the people who built them? Why did the Tudors persist? Why continue constructing vast great halls that were physically impossible to heat? Why endure 6-hour feasts while teeth chattered and limbs numbed? Why accept suffering as the cost of power? The answer is darker than ignorance. Status demanded visibility. Visibility demanded scale. Scale demanded stone. Warmth was sacrificed on the altar of dominance. To be seen as powerful, you had to suffer publicly. The palace was not built for comfort. It was built for awe. And the cold was the price. In the Tudor world, progress did not mean relief. It meant endurance. And by the end of this story, you will understand why modern comfort is not inevitable, but borrowed. Power is supposed to protect you. That is the lie every civilization tells itself. In Tudor England, power had a face. It sat on a throne of gold. It wore velvet and fur. It commanded armies, laws, and faith itself. When the king spoke, men died. When he gestured, fortunes vanished. No force in the realm could oppose him. And yet none of that mattered when winter arrived. Because the enemy the Tudors faced was not human. It did not march. It did not negotiate. It did not retreat. It simply arrived and stayed. The Little Ice Age was not a season. It was a siege laid against the human body itself. A slow planetary shift that wrapped Europe in colder air, longer nights, deeper freezes. Glaciers advanced. Rivers stopped flowing. Harvests failed. And England, damp and wind-lashed, became one of its favorite victims. Spanish ambassadors wrote that the cold was unbearable. Venetian diplomats complained that English winters felt hostile to life itself. These were not peasants speaking. These were men accustomed to marble palaces and Mediterranean warmth, reduced to misery inside the greatest courts of northern Europe. And at the center of it all sat the king. The throne room is vast. The ceiling soars upward into shadow. The walls are armored in stone. Guards stand motionless, spears grounded, armor biting cold against skin. Tapestries hang heavy, absorbing moisture, doing almost nothing to stop the chill bleeding through the walls. The king sits elevated, surrounded by symbols of absolute authority. And he is shivering. Not subtly. Not discreetly. Violently. His hands tremble as he grips the arms of the throne. His jaw tightens to keep his teeth from chattering. Breath fogs in the air as though he were outdoors. Somewhere nearby, a servant feeds logs into a hearth, but the fire is a lie. Its warmth dies inches from the flame. This is the atmospheric irony of Tudor power. The king can sign a death warrant with a single stroke of his pen, yet he can barely hold the quill. Like Baldwin IV facing an enemy force that outnumbered him 50-1, the Tudor monarch sits surrounded by a foe that cannot be seen, cannot be fought, and cannot be escaped. The palace is under siege, and the walls are on the enemy's side. The mathematics of this war are merciless. Tudor palaces were not built for warmth. They were built for permanence, for intimidation, for dominance. 6-foot-thick masonry, quarried stone, lime mortar, materials chosen to defy cannon fire and rebellion. But stone has a memory. Once it becomes cold, it stays cold. During prolonged freezes, the temperature of palace walls dropped below freezing and stayed there for weeks, sometimes months. These walls did not merely fail to protect the people inside. They attacked them. This is the cold battery. Every human body produces heat. But inside a Tudor palace, that heat was pulled outward relentlessly, drained into thousands of tons of frozen stone. The walls absorbed warmth the way dry earth absorbs rain, silently, completely, without mercy. Against this, the king's defenses were pathetic. One hearth fire. One chimney. A glow of warmth extending no more than 3 feet. Against that stood an ocean of ice. Stone walls radiating cold from every direction. Floors leaching heat through boots and slippers. Ceilings bleeding warmth upward into darkness. Even the air itself felt heavy, wet, hostile. It was a battle no human physiology could win. The longer you remained still, the faster you lost heat. And Tudor protocol demanded stillness. Nobles were expected to stand motionless during audiences. Kings sat through hours of ceremony. 6-hour feasts were not optional. They were displays of power. Power meant endurance, and endurance meant damage. Blood thickened, fingers numbed, muscles stiffened, hearts strained to maintain rhythm in a body slowly slipping toward hypothermia. People did not need to freeze to death outright. All it took was for the cold to weaken the immune system, slow circulation, and let infection finish the job. This is where the race began. A race not against armies but against biology. Medical records from the period speak in euphemisms: winter fever, chest sickness, sudden weakness. These were not mysteries. They were cold-induced collapses. Pneumonia. Hypothermia. Organ failure triggered by prolonged exposure to sub-zero interiors. The nursery was the most dangerous place of all. Infants lost heat faster than adults. Royal babies, wrapped in silk instead of wool, surrounded by drafty stone, died in horrifying numbers. The death of an heir was not tragedy, it was instability. Every cough carried political consequences. Servants paid the price as well. To keep the palace functioning, they had to move. Constantly. Carrying waste through frozen corridors. Fetching wood from icy courtyards. Hauling water from wells rimmed with ice. Frostbite was common. Fingers blackened. Toes lost. People collapsed and were quietly replaced. This was not life inside a palace. This was survival inside a freezer. Every hour without sunlight was a countdown. Every night was a test. And then came the cruelest irony of all. The very symbols of Tudor status, the things meant to protect and elevate the elite, became their greatest vulnerability. Fashion killed them. High ruffs framed the face, stiffened with starch, designed to show wealth and refinement. But they trapped moisture from breath, creating damp collars pressed against the neck, one of the body's most critical heat loss zones. Cold air circulated freely beneath them, drawing warmth away with every exhale. Layered silks looked luxurious, but silk insulates poorly when damp. Heavy gowns restricted movement, preventing blood flow. Furs trapped moisture, becoming cold weights dragging heat from the torso. The poor, huddled in small wooden homes, sometimes fared better. Low ceilings, shared body heat, crude fireplaces that actually warmed the space. Inside the palace, status demanded exposure. Nobles sat through feasts as wine turned to slush in their cups. Not metaphor. Not exaggeration. Documented fact. Venetian envoys wrote of it with disbelief. Spanish diplomats complained that England's court was fit for animals, not men. The king endured it because he had to. To leave was to appear weak. To complain was to diminish authority. So they stayed. They froze. And they died. This was the darkest hour of the palace. Not a single night, but centuries of repetition. A beautiful, expensive, meticulously crafted machine that converted power into suffering. An architectural nightmare disguised as civilization. And if you think this sounds distant, irrelevant, safely buried in the past, remember this. Every modern comfort you enjoy exists because this system failed. If this story is already changing how you see history, stay with me. What comes next explains why the Tudors refused to fix the problem, even when they understood it was killing them, and how desperation pushed them toward solutions that were just as deadly. Because the cold did not just break bodies. It broke judgment. And what they did next made everything worse. The Tudors knew. That is the most important truth. They knew the palaces were killing them. They knew the cold was winning. And still they refused to leave. Just as Baldwin IV rejected the safety of Jerusalem's walls and rode out to face annihilation in open ground, the Tudor monarchs made a decision that defined their age. They would not retreat into smaller, warmer dwellings. They would not concede comfort over dominance. To abandon the great stone palaces would be to admit weakness. It would mean admitting that the climate, an invisible force, held more power than the crown. That winter could humble a king where armies could not. That status itself had limits. So they stayed. They sat in halls that could not be heated. They slept in chambers colder than the outside air. They endured because endurance was the performance of power. Every meal became a last stand. 6-hour banquets were not feasts. They were sieges. The king and his court sat exposed, unmoving, while the cold worked its way inward. No pacing. No retreat to warmer rooms. To rise early was to insult the crown. To complain was unthinkable. Power demanded stillness. And stillness accelerated death. This was defiance, not ignorance. A conscious choice to suffer for status. Step inside the palace. Not as a visitor. Not as a tourist. As a body. The door closes behind you. The echo dies. The space swallows heat instantly. Stone walls radiate cold like living things. The floor pulls warmth through leather soles. Every breath feels damp, heavy, invasive. At the center of the room burns a fire. It roars. Flames leap. Logs crack. Sparks rise into the chimney. And it does almost nothing. Stand 3 feet away and you feel it. Take 1 step back and it vanishes. The fire warms air, not mass. It cannot compete with thousands of tons of frozen stone. The walls absorb heat faster than the hearth can produce it, draining the room in real time. This is the arithmetic of failure. 1 fire versus an ocean of ice. The cold does not rush. It does not scream. It advances millimeter by millimeter, minute by minute, until fingers go numb, joints stiffen, and thought slows. You do not notice it winning until your body betrays you. And then the doctors intervene. Or rather, they make it worse. Tudor medicine believed disease came from miasma, poisoned air trapped indoors. The solution was ventilation, fresh air, movement. So they opened the windows. In winter, in sub-zero temperatures. Imagine it. A royal bedchamber. Frost on the walls. A dying fire in the hearth. And servants unshuttering windows to cleanse the air, allowing knives of cold wind to slice directly across the king's body as he sleeps. This was not cruelty. It was doctrine. Medical experts prescribed exposure as protection. Drafts were considered healthy. Stagnant warmth was feared more than hypothermia. The death chill was invited inside. And it came eagerly. Servants paid first. They were the frontline soldiers in this war. The ones who moved when movement itself was dangerous. Carrying chamber pots through frozen corridors. Emptying garderobes where waste froze solid before it could be removed. Hauling wood through courtyards rimmed with ice. Frostbite was common. Permanent damage routine. Fingers stiffened, blackened, lost. Men collapsed mid-task and were dragged aside so duty could continue. The court glittered above them. Below it bled. And when the cold became unbearable, when even kings could no longer sleep, desperation set in. This is where the secret appears. The fire hazard paradox. To survive the night, the Tudors turned to warming pans. Metal containers filled with glowing coals, slid beneath bedclothes to heat the sheets before sleep. In theory, they were removed before anyone lay down. In practice, fear overrode caution. The palaces were so cold that people slept inches from live embers. Beds became furnaces balanced on the edge of catastrophe. A single mistake, a tipped pan, a shifted coal, was enough. The fires that followed were swift and lethal. Four-poster beds went up like torches. Curtains ignited. Entire chambers filled with smoke before anyone could react. People burned alive because freezing felt worse. This was the gamble. Burn or freeze. Night after night the choice was made. And then came the banquet. The moment where the illusion of power was tested publicly. The great hall fills with candlelight. Hundreds of flames flicker, doing nothing but casting shadows. Nobles arrive wrapped in 5 layers of fur, silk beneath wool beneath velvet. Breath fogs visibly as they bow. The sound of movement is muted, heavy fabrics brushing stone. The king enters. Silence falls. He takes his seat, elevated, exposed, unmoving. The feast begins. Silverware clinks. Plates are served. Steam rises briefly from dishes before vanishing into the cold air. Wine is poured. And then it happens. The liquid thickens. Crystals form. Slush clings to the sides of the cup. Wine freezes in the king's hand. The sound is unmistakable, the dull scrape of ice against silver as he lifts it. No one comments. No one reacts. To acknowledge it would be to admit reality. High ruffs frame every noble face, stiff, immaculate, and lethal. With every breath, warm air escapes upward and outward, siphoned away from the core. Necks lose heat faster than bodies can replace it. Core temperature drops silently. 6 hours. 6 hours of stillness. 6 hours of slow physiological collapse masquerading as power. If this is shocking, stay with me because this is not the worst part. What comes next reveals why the Tudors could not escape this trap, even when it was killing them, and how the palace itself became a machine that enforced suffering. If you want to understand how civilization sometimes mistakes endurance for strength, don't leave now, because the walls are closing in. Every siege has a moment when resistance ends. Not with a trumpet, not with a declaration, but with a sound. In Tudor England, that sound was ice. In the winter of 1564, the Thames stopped moving. Not gradually, not politely. It hardened. The river that fed London, its trade, its food, its coal, its lifeblood, locked into a jagged sheet so solid that carts crossed it as if it were land. Frost crept across the water like rot across flesh, thickening by the hour, cracking and groaning under its own weight. This was the tipping point. Until now, winter had been endured, suffered, explained away. Now it became a siege. Ships could not dock. Barges carrying grain froze midstream. Coal deliveries failed. Food vanished from markets. Prices spiked overnight. The city began to starve while sitting beside a frozen artery it could no longer use. The kingdom's defenses had failed. And the palace, built as a monument to dominance, became a trap. Temperatures dropped to levels the human heart was never designed to survive. Inside stone chambers, the cold was worse than outside. The walls radiated death continuously, draining warmth even as people slept. This was no longer discomfort. This was a body count. Communities vanished quietly. The poor froze in alleyways. The old did not wake up. The sick slipped into hypothermia and never returned. The arithmetic of annihilation was no longer theoretical. It was visible. And inside the palaces, panic replaced denial. Because now the cold was killing faster than anyone could respond. Here is where the narrative snaps. Because the very things people did to survive accelerated their deaths. The warming pans multiplied. Metal containers packed with glowing coals were pushed into beds and left there through the night. Fear overruled caution. People were desperate to feel heat anywhere, even inches from flame. And then the fires began. Stone rooms trapped smoke. Thick walls delayed the smell. By the time sleepers sensed danger, it was too late. Beds ignited. Curtains caught. Chambers filled with poison air before anyone could scream. People burned alive in palaces built to protect them. Not because they were careless. Because freezing felt worse. At the same time, the doctors insisted on their doctrine. Windows were opened. Nurseries were aired. Bad air had to be released, they said. Disease floated on stagnant warmth. Fresh air would save the children. Instead, it killed them. Sub-zero winds poured directly across cradles. Tiny lungs collapsed. Winter fevers turned lethal. What might have been survivable infections became death sentences. The nursery became a charnel house. And beneath it all, the palace filled with another horror. Waste froze. Garderobes, stone latrines built into palace walls, became frozen blocks of filth. Excrement hardened before it could be removed. Servants hacked at it with tools, hands numbing, lungs burning. Infections spread. Parasites thrived. The most basic human function became a source of agony, humiliation, and disease. This was the physiological nightmare. Every system designed to support life failed simultaneously. To people of the 16th century, this was not climate. It was judgment. Spanish ambassadors wrote home in fear. In the Simancas archives, they described the cold as unbearable, the court as cursed. Venetian observers noted that England seemed abandoned by God, its rulers punished despite their power. And then there was the wine. Again and again chroniclers recorded it. 6-hour feasts. Endless ceremony. The king seated beneath banners and crowns. And wine turning to slush in his cup. To us this is physics. To them it was apocalypse. The natural order had broken. Fire failed. Stone betrayed. Food vanished. Rivers turned to iron. The symbols of civilization no longer worked. This was not just cold. It was a curse. And status offered no protection. The elite suffered most. Nobles shivered through banquets, hands too numb to lift cutlery. Faces went pale, then blotched, muscles twitching from cold stress. Breath fogged constantly. Eyes watered uncontrollably, not from emotion, but from pain. They wept without tears, faces literally leaking fluid as blood vessels constricted and expanded under stress. And they could not leave. To abandon the hall was to abandon rank. So they stayed. And paid. The corridors of Hampton Court became ravines. Long, dark, draft-filled passageways where servants collapsed unnoticed, fingers frozen, legs giving out after hours of labor. They fell in shadows cast by hearts that warmed no one. Their sacrifices were invisible, unrecorded, absorbed into the stone like heat. Status meant suffering. Not metaphorically, mechanically. The palace converted power into pain with ruthless efficiency. And if this feels unbearable to imagine, stay with me. Because what follows is not relief. It is the reckoning. The moment when history answers a question that should never have been asked. Why did they keep building these places, after knowing what they did? That answer changes how you understand progress itself. If you want the truth behind civilization's most dangerous illusion, don't look away now. When the cold finally loosened its grip, it did not leave quietly. It left bodies. After every great frost, dawn revealed a city changed. Not by fire, not by invasion, but by absence. Streets that once hummed with carts and voices lay silent. Doors stayed closed. Fires went unlit. The living learned who had not survived the night by which windows never opened again. This was the harvest of ice. Unlike war, there were no battlefields to walk. No banners torn. No armor left rusting in fields. The dead were counted differently. In parish records. In burial rolls. In sudden spikes that terrified those who understood numbers. During peak frost years, London's mortality rate surged by more than 20%. Not from plague. Not from rebellion. From cold. Thousands simply went to sleep and never woke up. Their hearts slowed. Blood thickened. The body surrendered quietly. No wounds. No drama. Just silence. And inside the palaces, the aftermath was worse. The ravines of this war were not carved into earth. They were carved into hierarchy. Servant quarters. Narrow rooms. Low ceilings. Straw bedding. Minimal fires. People packed tightly for warmth until even that failed. After the cold broke, bodies were found frozen in place. Curled inward. Hands clenched. Faces locked in expressions of strain. Hay-filled beds turned into shallow graves. They lay where they fell. And the court stepped over them. Not from cruelty. From necessity. The great hall still demanded ceremony. The machinery of power did not stop for the dead who kept it running. Servants who survived dragged bodies out before dawn, so nobles would not see the cost of their comfort. These were the bridges of flesh. Not filling ravines but hallways. Survival had its price. And that price was ruin. To keep even a fraction of palace rooms habitable, the Tudor crown burned through fuel at an unprecedented rate. Household accounts from Henry VIII and Elizabeth I record staggering quantities of wood and coal consumed every winter. Modern estimates translate this into millions of pounds spent annually just to slow the cold. Not defeat it. Slow it. Entire forests vanished into hearts that warmed nothing. Coal deliveries struggled through frozen roads and rivers. When the Thames froze, fuel stopped moving entirely. Fires died. Rooms went dark. Trade collapsed alongside warmth. Markets emptied. Customs revenues dried up. The very river that made London rich became an iron barrier choking the economy. Where Baldwin's victory at Montcassard flooded Jerusalem with captured wealth, the Tudor winters did the opposite. They bled the treasury dry. Survival produced no surplus. Only debt. Every winter erased gains made during summer. Every thaw revealed how much had been lost. Recovery took years, sometimes a decade, before the next frost erased it again. This was not cyclical hardship. It was systemic exhaustion. And at the center of it all stood the monarch. Diminished. Foreign diplomats noticed immediately. Venetian observers described rulers who shook visibly during audiences. Spanish envoys wrote of courts where even the king's hands trembled as he spoke. These were not youthful weaknesses. They were physiological scars. Months in stone freezers did not leave people unchanged. Joints stiffened permanently. Circulation suffered. Illness lingered. Voices weakened. The body remembered the cold long after it left. and reputation followed physiology. If a king could not control the climate within his own walls, what did that say about his power beyond them? If royal wine froze during ceremony, what confidence could soldiers have that their leaders could protect them in war? This was the ultimate humiliation. Not defeat. Exposure. The illusion cracked. Yet the Tudors endured. Not because they were strong, but because there was no alternative. Every great frost was followed by a long, painful rebuilding. Fields replanted. Trade rerouted. Architecture adjusted slowly, reluctantly. Smaller rooms. Lower ceilings. Thicker textiles. Incremental changes forced by suffering rather than foresight. These winters shaped the monarchy. They hardened it. They taught rulers that survival required adaptation, not denial. That dominance without comfort was hollow. That the environment was an adversary no army could conquer. The scars remained. And if this story feels distant, remember this. Your warmth is inherited. Every heated room, every insulated wall, every winter night you survive comfortably exists because generations before you froze, proving what did not work. If this has changed how you see power, architecture, or comfort, stay with me. Because the final chapter is not about the Tudors. It's about us, and the illusion we still live inside. The cold did not win, but it changed everything. Like the Battle of Montcassard, the Tudor struggle against the ice did not end in triumph. It ended in adaptation. A hard-earned, blood-soaked lesson carved into stone, timber, and human memory. The great palaces did not disappear overnight. But slowly, quietly, their dominance faded. The massive halls that once defined power were no longer expanded. They were subdivided, broken down, softened. Stone gave way to brick. Vaulted ceilings lowered. Rooms grew smaller. Heat at last could be contained. This was not an aesthetic choice. It was survival. The modern world was born not from ambition, but from surrender. Surrender to physics, to biology, to the limits of the human body. The stone freezers of the Tudor age taught a brutal truth. Scale without warmth is meaningless. Out of that truth came revolution. The great hall died. In its place emerged something new. Intimate chambers. Enclosed spaces. Rooms designed not to impress crowds but to protect lives. This was the birth of the living room. The private chamber. The domestic space where heat mattered more than hierarchy. The cold forced a social fracture. Kings could no longer shiver publicly with hundreds of attendants. Ceremony gave way to privacy. Power retreated inward. The ruler withdrew into privy chambers where fires could actually do their work. Status no longer meant exposure. It meant insulation. And from that retreat came the ancestors of central heating. Chimneys refined. Flues redirected. Walls insulated. Heat engineered, not begged for. Every modern system that hums quietly beneath your floor exists because Tudor kings froze, proving what not to build. This was the strategic legacy of the death chill. Not conquest. Correction. Now ask yourself the question history leaves behind. If you were offered all the gold of Henry VIII, every palace, every title, every servant, but in exchange you had to live in a room where your wine froze in your cup, where doctors ordered windows opened in winter, where your bed was a fire hazard just to survive the night, would you take it? This is the paradox of power. Wealth without control over the environment is illusion. Authority that cannot keep a body alive is theater. The Tudors had everything we are told to want, and it nearly destroyed them. Progress is fragile. The Little Ice Age did not last a year. It did not last a decade. It lasted 3 centuries. Entire generations were born, lived, and died under the assumption that cold was permanent. That suffering was normal. That survival was victory. We are the exception. We live inside a narrow window of stability, buffered by technologies purchased with the pain of those who came before. Our comfort is not inevitable. It is inherited. And inheritance can be lost. So return one last time to the image that began this story. The king alone in his chamber. Gold everywhere. Power unquestioned. Authority absolute. And yet, he breathes fog into the air. His hands shake. The walls bleed cold. Outside the window, the Thames hardens, turning to iron under a pale winter sky. A Spanish ambassador stands nearby, wrapped in foreign furs, realizing with quiet horror that the greatest court in England cannot defeat the weather. The next time you complain about a drafty window or a broken thermostat, remember him. Because in the 16th century, the ultimate luxury was not gold or land or a crown. It was a single night where you did not have to wonder if you would wake up in the morning. This was the Tudor winter, a time when status meant suffering, when architecture betrayed its masters, when every sunrise was a victory against the death chill. And history remembers it not for its warmth, but for what it taught us about survival. If this story stayed with you, tell me, what part of the Tudor winter sounds the most horrifying to you? The frozen wine, the open windows, or the cold battery walls? Let me know in the comments below. And if you think the Tudor winter was brutal, wait until you see what the Victorians did to survive the Great Stink. That story is waiting for you next.